Okay, hi there, Addie. Today's lesson is going to be so fun. And after today's lesson, like I gave you a little teaser already yesterday, but after today's lesson, there is going to be no subtraction. What? I know I just blew your mind, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we actually have a lot to go over before then, and we are going to go over rules for addition. Okay, there's a couple of rules we need to know. Also, adding more than two numbers, which I know you know how to do, but when you start adding signs like positive and negative signs, there are some rules that are going to make it easier and make sure that you get the right answer every single time, so that's going to be super important. And then we're going to talk about inserting parentheses mentally. Yes, we are going to do some mental work today. And we are going to go over the definition of subtraction, which is going to make it so that subtraction doesn't exist. Speaking of little magic tricks here, I know I've used this one before, but it's such a classic. We just got to do it again. A Mexican magician tells the audience he will disappear on the count of three. He says, uno, dos, poof. He disappeared without a trace. Get it? I dare you to tell your Spanish teacher that one. They might like it. Okay, but first of all, let's jump right in. So in the last lesson, we learned to add signed numbers by using a number line and arrows to represent the numbers, right? And so when we did it that way, we have sort of a graphical picture of what we're doing, but that is too slow and time consuming to do that from now on. So we're going to use a couple of rules. One to use when the numbers have the same signs, like a positive and a positive sign, so adding like 2 plus 3. And another one to use when the numbers have different signs, like a -3 and a +2. So we're going to use a couple of examples to help us figure out that first rule. So it's weird in this lesson, but we're going to start out with an example. Okay, just a little humor to get us going. I don't know that we've seen that one. Have you seen that one yet? Tell me if you've seen it. Text me and be like, I recognize that scene, or I don't recognize that scene. Anyway, let's jump into example 6.1. Okay, so they want us to use the number line. We're going to add the numbers +1 and +3, and then we're going to add -1 and -3. Okay, so if you're following along, this is on page 30, right at the top of the page. All right, so first we're going to add the +1 and the +3. And there's another way to write that. So I'm just going to write it really quickly the other way, and it's like this. +1, okay, plus +3. And you'll see why that becomes important later on. Okay, so if we use this number line, we are going to start at the origin, which is 0 every single time. We go 1 to the right because that's a positive sign. And then we go 3 more spaces, 1, 2, 3. And when we go we're at 4. So +1 plus +3. I mean, I don't even know. You don't need me to go through this, but it's good for when it gets complicated. And trust me, it's going to get complicated. I know you know how to add 1 plus 3. Of course you do. I shouldn't be insulting you like that, right? But just go through it because it's about to get super complicated. All right, so we did that. We get it. We know how to add 1 plus 3. I'm just going to erase that. What about a -1 and a -3? Okay, so again, -1 and -3. So we're going to start at the origin. -1 means 1 to the left. -3 means 3 more spaces to the left. And then we're at -4. So if I write that a different way, it's like this. -1 plus, this is going to be important. So literally pay attention to how it's written. Okay. This equation, the way it looks right here with a -1, and then we're adding another negative number, takes you to -4. Okay, so with these examples, we can figure out the first rule. And the first rule is, I'll write it here next to Laura. Look at the country girl. The first rule is when you're adding two signed numbers that have the same sign, so if you're adding a positive and a positive, or a negative and a negative, what you do is you add the absolute values of the numbers and you give the answer the same sign as the sign of the numbers that you're adding. Okay, so for example, if you're adding 1 and 3, +1 and +3, which we just did, then another way to think about that is you add the absolute value of 1 and the absolute value of 3, you get 4. And then what do you do with the answer? You give it the same sign as the numbers that you started out with, so a positive 4. Okay, let's go to the negative side. So if you are adding negative 1 and you're adding that to negative 3, what you do is you add the absolute values. So pretend they don't have negative signs. You add the absolute value of 1, which is 1. You add the absolute value of 3, which is 3. You get 4, and you give that answer the same sign as the numbers that you started out with. So negative 4. So that's a rule, okay? Rule number 1 is to add two numbers that have the same sign. You add their absolute values and then give the answer the same sign as what you started out with. Okay, let's try it. We're going to jump into example 6.2. Okay, I hope you're not like, wait for me, I don't understand it yet. It's okay, you will understand it. Okay, so we're going to add negative 2. This is not working. Okay, negative 2 and positive 5, positive 2 and negative 5. Now, the first rule that we just came up with, rule number 1, that does not apply here because now we have a negative and a positive and a negative. So we're going to go through it the old-fashioned way, which is on a number line. So let's start with the negative 2 and the positive 5. Now, if we're writing that another way, it's going to be negative 2 plus positive 5 equals what? Let's figure it out on the number line. We start out at the origin. We're going to go 2 to the left. 1, 2 takes us there. Now we go up from there. We're going to go 5 to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where'd we end up? Positive 3. Okay, so the answer is going to be positive 3. Okay. All right, now we're going to do this second problem. So negative 2 plus 5 is 3, positive 3. Okay. Now we're going to do this positive 2 and negative 5. And I know you're already thinking it's negative 3 because you can probably do that in your head. But I'm going to start at the origin. I'm going to go 2 to the right. Boom, boom. I'm going to go up from there, and I'm going to go 5 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now you know how to do it graphically, right? And then we end up at negative 3. So the answer is negative 3. Okay, so what's the rule that we can make from that? This is going to be rule number 2. This is rule number 2, and I already wrote this one out. What if we have opposite signs? If we have opposite signs, you take the difference in absolute values. So remember last time, the previous rule, you added the absolute values. If they're opposite signs, you take the difference of the absolute values, and then you give the answer the sign of the bigger number. Ooh, okay. So if we did that rule here, let's see. Let me look at the rule because that's a complicated rule. So I'm going to erase some of this. Whoops. I'm going to erase some of this, and I'm going to practice. Okay. Let's go back to that example that we just had. We had negative 2 plus positive 5. So they're saying when the signs are opposite, like they are here, you've got a negative and you've got a positive, you take the absolute value. So the absolute value of this one's 2, the absolute value of this is 5. You take the difference of those. So the difference, what's the difference between 2 and 5? Well, the difference is 3. And then what sign does the answer have? The sign of the answer is the sign of the bigger number. So the bigger number that we started out with was positive 5. So this is going to be positive 3. So that's kind of cool because I don't even have to really think about the problem in terms of a number line. I can just do negative 2 plus 5. They have different signs. I'm going to take the difference of their absolute values, which is 3, and then I'm going to give it the sign of the bigger number. Okay, what if the value is the same? So what if it's like negative 5 plus positive 5? So we're adding two numbers, but they've got different signs, but the difference between them turns out to be 0. Well, it's just going to be 0. And that totally makes sense because negative 5 plus 5 is 0. And negative anything plus that same anything, if it's positive, is going to be 0. So every number has its opposites. When you add the opposites together, you get 0. let me say that again. Every real number has its opposite. That's why because look at the red and the, like they just come together and make nothing. It's zero. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. Every real number, except zero, because zero doesn't really have an opposite. It's just zero. Every real number has its opposite. Now, I already said that. There's a reason opposite is crossed out because they want us to think about it in a different way. Instead of opposite, it's going to be the additive inverse. It's the number that you add to it to make zero. So like the additive inverse of 7 is -7. The additive inverse of -8 is +8. It's the number that you add to make zero. Why, it's opposite day. All right, yes. You're right, Squidward, it is opposite day. Let's do some problems. Let's just make sure that we understand the rules. All right, so here's the rules again. We're going to start with A. If you're following along, this is on the bottom of page 30, but that's okay. I don't want you to follow along in the book. Just really, really, really pay attention to this because these are really super tricky. We have opposite signs, so we're using number 2. So if we're opposite signs, I'm going to do 7 and 3 because those are the absolute values. I'm going to take the difference. So the difference is going to be 4. And then what sign does it get? It gets the sign of the biggest number, which is positive. So it's going to be +4. That's my answer. And then I'm going to look back and see, does that make sense? If I start at +7 and take away 3, yeah, I get 4. That makes total sense. All right, let's go to B. Here we are adding two numbers that have the same sign. So that is rule number 1. So the first step is take the absolute value. We've got a 2 and a 6. Easy, because they were both positive. Except rule number 1, we're going to add them. We get 8. What sign does the answer get? It gets the same sign as the sign of the numbers. They're both the same because that's rule number 1. They have to be the same. So we have +8. And that answer makes sense because 2 + 6 is 8. Let's go on to C. We're just reinforcing this concept. Okay, these have the same signs, but they're negative. So what do? We take the absolute value of them. The absolute value of -7 is going to be 7. +7. What's the absolute value of -3? It's going to be 3. This is rule number 1 because they have the same sign. So don't forget, we're actually going to add them. The answer is 10, but the answer gets the same sign as the numbers we started out with. So it's -10. That makes sense. -7 plus a -3 is -10. Boom. We're getting this. All right, let's do D. D is going to be using rule number 1 because the signs are the same. So rule number 1 says take the absolute value, 2 and 8. Rule number 1 says you add them together. Bam. And we get 10. But what sign does the answer get? It gets the same sign that we started out with on both of those numbers, so it's a negative. All right, let's do E. E, ooh, look at this. Check it out. We've got opposite signs here. With opposite signs, we're going to be using rule number 2. Step 1 is to take the absolute value of these numbers. The absolute value of -7 is 7. The absolute value of +3 is 3. Do we take the sum or the difference? This is rule number 2. We're going to take the difference. What's 7 minus 3? It is 4. What sign does the answer get? It gets the sign of the bigger number. So it's going to be a negative. Man, we are cruising and we are getting this. Okay, let's do -2 plus a +8. Here we go. Is this rule number 1 or rule number 2? They are opposite signs, so we are going to be using rule number 2. First step, take the absolute value, 2 and an 8. Are we going to add or subtract? It's rule number 2. So what do? We are going to add them. Right? Rule number 2? Yeah. We take, oh no! That's wrong. We're going to take the difference. It's rule number 2. Oh, come on. How are we going to remember that? Rule number 2, we take the difference. Now, okay, I wrote this wrong because when I say the difference, I don't mean 2 minus 8. I mean the difference between 2 and 8. So it's actually going to be like 8 minus 2 because it's just the difference of their absolute values. Ooh, this was a good problem because this really made me think. When it's late at night, it makes me think. I love that. All right, so the difference between 8 and 2 is 6. That's all you have to think. Take the absolute value and then what's the difference or what's the space between those numbers on the number line, right? So 8 minus 2 is 6. What sign does the answer get? It gets the sign of the bigger number. So let's just make sure that this answer makes sense with the original problem because I messed it up already. So if we start out with -2 on the number line and we add 8 to that, yeah, we're going to totally end up at a +6. So that makes sense. We did it right. Bam. All right, let's do this one. Is this going to be rule number 1 or rule number 2? Well, the signs are the same, so we're going to be using rule number 1. Step 1, take the absolute value. That part's the easy part. Now, are we going to add or subtract? Rule number 1 says we're going to add the absolute values. Okay, how am I going to remember that? Rule number 1, we add. Add absolute values. Okay, I don't know. I'm just going to remember it for now, and maybe I'll think of a mnemonic later. All right, so the answer is 5. 4 and 1, when you add them together, is 5. What sign does the answer get? And it gets the same sign as the numbers we started out with, so it's going to end up being negative. All right, let's do H. This is the last one where we get to practice, and I'm glad that we're doing this one because it's rule number 2. Rule number 2 says they're opposite signs. First step is to take the absolute value. So this is 2, this is 8. Now we're going to take the difference. The difference between 2 and 8 is 6, right? Because there's a space between a 2 and 8 and a number line of 6. What sign does the answer get? The sign is going to be the same as the bigger number, like the bigger absolute value, which is negative. Okay, now let's make sure that this makes sense. If we start out at +2 and we add to that a -8, that means we're going negative 8 spaces. Yeah, we're going to totally end up at -6. So we are doing this right and we are on a roll. Okay, now what about if we're adding more than 2 numbers? It seems like that rule doesn't apply, right? So a lot of times when we are adding sign numbers, we are adding more than 2. The one important thing to remember is they can be added in any order. You get to choose. You have free will over the order that you want to start adding these numbers together. And guess what? Because of the commutative property of addition, it says that 1 plus 3 is 4, but also 3 plus 1 is 4. Doesn't matter which order they're in, the answer is not going to change. And that's the same when you're adding lots and lots of signed numbers together, that the answer is not going to change. So a lot of people like to add just from left to right, just like we read. And other people like to add all the numbers together that have the same sign. Sometimes I do that. I don't know. I like to mix it up. So let's just look and see how we do this first one. We're going to do example 6.3. This is starting on the top of page 31. And we are going to add -5, +4, -3, and a +2. So we have all these numbers that we're going to add together. This time, let's add them from left to right. So the first thing is we're going to take 2 numbers at a time. We're always just going to take 2 at a time. We have a -5 and a +4. Now, should we do the rules again? So this is a negative and this is a positive. So that would be rule number 2. We have a 5 and a 4. And rule number 2 says if you take the difference between them, you're going to get a 1. And that the sign of that answer is going to have the sign of the bigger number, which is the 5. So it's going to be -1. So if I just put brackets around this and I did this part first, then I can reduce that part to -1. Sweet. We already did part of the problem. So now I'm going to bring down the rest of the equation. And let's take 2 more numbers at a time again. So we are going to take, let me get a different color so it doesn't get too confusing here. I'm going to take this part of the equation now. -1 and a plus a -3. So is this going to be rule number 1 or rule number 2? Well, they have the same sign, so it's going to be rule number 1. So I'm going to take the absolute value. This is 1. This is 3. And with rule number 1, do we add them or do we subtract them? We add them. So if we add 1 plus 3, we get 4. So I'm just going to erase it, put 4. What sign does the answer get? It gets the same sign as the two numbers that we started out with. So it's going to be -4. Now I'm just going to bring down, I already simplified all of this to -4, right? So I'm just going to bring down the rest of the equation, which is this part that's hanging on the end right here that we haven't dealt with yet. But we're going to deal with it now. Okay, so now I'm just adding two numbers together again. And am I going to use rule number 1 or rule number 2? This is going to be rule number 2 because they are different signs. Let's take the absolute value. This is going to be 4. This is going to be 2. This is rule number 2, so we're going to take the difference. What's the difference between 2 and 4? It's 2. What sign does the answer get? It gets the sign of the bigger number, so I'm going to make that a negative. So, bam, that is the answer. And that was the answer to this original problem. So don't lose track of what you did. We solved this complicated problem one little step at a time and got a negative answer, and we got it correct. That's the important thing. Your guy won't land on Mars if you don't do your math right? You got it. Those astronauts depend on good quality mathematical precision, right? You saw Apollo 13. We got to get this right. We got to land that guy on the moon, and maybe when you're all grown up, you're going to be landing someone on Mars. Who knows? Let's do example 6.4. We're not going to mess up our positive and negatives. We want that guy to land on Mars. So, or gal, maybe you'll be going. Maybe you'll be sending Danny. He really wants to go to Mars for some reason, so let's get this right for him. All right, let's add this complicated. Look at this whole problem. Man, that is huge. They want us to add a lot of numbers here. So, we see, like if we just take a step back and look at this, you can see that you are adding two negative numbers together and you're adding two positive numbers together. So this time, let's do it a little different and add all the negative numbers together. So I'm just going to circle. We're going to add the -3 and we're going to add the -2. So what is -3 plus -2? Is this rule number 1 or rule number 2? Oh man, I sound like Dr. Seuss. That really rhymed. -3 plus a -2 is going to be, since they have the same sign, that's rule number 1. So we take the absolute value, 3 and 2. We're gonna add them together. We get 5. What sign does the answer have? It has the sign of the numbers that we started out with, so that's going to be negative. Bam. Okay, so guess what? I can cross those out because I already dealt with the -3. I already dealt with the -2. What do we have left? We've got this +2 and this +4 that we have to add together. So you could just do 2 plus 4 is 6, right? But if you think about it in terms of the rules, they have the same sign. So we're going to add the absolute value of 2 and the absolute value of 4, which is 6. The answer is going to have the same sign that we started out with, which is positive. So that's going to be plus a +6. And you're going to understand why I write it this way in a little while, once you start doing your homework, I promise. So now we're adding just these two numbers. And you could kind of simplify it in your head as saying, well, it's 6 minus 5. But it's kind of -5 plus a +6. So this is rule number 2 because they have opposite signs. So we take the absolute value of 6 and 5. What's the difference between 6 and 5? The difference is going to be 1. The difference between 6 and 5. Now, is it a positive or negative? It's positive because 6 is the larger number as far as the absolute value. Okay, I know you were probably looking at this picture down below and you're like, what the heck is that, Mom? It's just a lady having a mental breakdown, and we're about to have a mental breakdown because we are going to learn how to insert parentheses mentally into a problem. Because here's the thing. A lot of times, instead of giving you all of those parentheses, they're going to give you something like this. And what do you do with this? The problem is, it is really easy to get a wrong answer when you do something like this. Because you're going to do like, I don't know, you're going to do like, you got to learn to insert the parentheses correctly and not just willy-nilly anywhere you want, right? So when they give you something like this, in order to get the right answer, you got to do the right thing with the parentheses. And the right thing is this. +4, bam, parentheses there. Let's move that over a little bit so we have time. Or so we have room. Okay, so then we're going to add a -3. Bam! Do you see how I did that? We're adding a -3. We are never subtracting anymore. We're just going to add negatives. We're not going to subtract. See, you see where I'm going with this. Now, we're going to add a +2. So now this is like all of those problems that we have just gone through. And you can add +4 plus -3 plus +2. I'm not going to do it. We're just going to go to another example where we're inserting mental parentheses, okay? So what if you have something like this? Okay, so the problem with doing something like this is that a lot of times people get the wrong answer because they want to do the wrong thing. They want to say like 6 plus 2 minus 3, and it gets really, really confusing really quickly. You'll end up with the wrong sign on something, and your guy won't land on the moon. So let's do this right. To add parentheses to this, okay, I'm going to have to rewrite it because that's kind of complicated. So it's going to be -6 plus -3 plus -2 plus +5. So basically what you do is you separate the numbers. You give the number the sign of whatever sign comes right before it. You get rid of all subtraction in the problem. No more subtraction. We're just going to add negative numbers. So if there's a minus sign, that's going to turn into a negative number, but it's always going to be adding that negative number. Bam! Did that just blow your mind? This is going to be so much fun because adding is fun. Subtraction, not so fun. All right, so when you see a problem like this, what a lot of people do wrong is they say, oh, this is 6 plus 2 minus 3. No. No. See, Michael Scott, come on. No, he wants you to do it right. We got to do it right. It's going to be different from that. It's going to be -4 plus, let's move that over, plus a +2 plus, oh, I'm going to run out of room here. Let's do plus a -3. I'm running out of room. Okay. And this is going to be plus a -3. I'm running out of room. Okay, this is going to be plus a -2 plus a +6. Okay, you get the idea, but it's not easily 6 plus 2 minus 3. You might think it is, but it's not because you're going to do it right. All right. I hope you're not like this right now. You might be like this. Tell me if you are like this. Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5? Like Michael Scott would not get this math lesson. I think you're going to get it, but it's going to take some practice to get it because don't worry if you don't understand like what I'm saying right now. This kind of thing really, really takes practice. So we see a problem like this and we don't go, oh no. We actually, when we see a problem like this on the AP test or on ACT test, we're going to be like, yay, I know how to do this. I've done it 1,000 times. All right, example 6.5. This is on the bottom of page 31 if you're following along. So step 1 is to mentally put in parentheses. I'm going to rewrite the whole thing. -4 plus -3 plus +2. I'm giving each number the sign that's in front of it, but I'm just separating it all by addition. Bam! Do you get it? That's awesome. Now we're going to add the numbers. We're going to add the numbers and get our sum. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all the negative numbers together. Let's start with that. Okay, so I'm going to add 4 plus 3. I'm just adding the absolute values. 4 plus 3 is 7. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I've got -16 as a total of all the negatives. Now I'm going to add all the positives. Okay, so the positives are 2, and that's it. Okay, so -16 plus 2, and we get for our answer -14. Bam! Did you see that? I added the negatives, I added the positive, I got the right answer. Our guy landed on Mars. Sweet. Let's do example 6.6. Don't look at a problem like this and say that. No, we don't say that. We look at a problem like this and we're like, sweet, I got this. First step is mental. So, -2. Luckily, mental is our specialty in this family here, right? So we can do this. I'm just separating all of these into positive and negative. See how I did that? That was fun. That was fun. You got to show your work on this one because this is so fun. Also, if you don't show your work, you won't get it right. So let's add all the negatives first. I've got a -2, a -4. I'm using the rules because I'm just adding all their absolute values. So I've got a 2 and a 4 and a 2. 2 plus 4 is 6, plus another 2 is 8. Okay, and that is going to get the same sign as the number that we started. That's basically rule number 1, right? Now I'm also going to use rule number 1 because I like rule number 1 better. I got to be honest with you. I'm going to add the positive 11 and the positive 3. 11, 12, 13, 14, right? So the absolute value is 14. Does it have a positive or negative sign? It's going to have a positive sign because that's the same sign as what we started with in those numbers. So now we're down to -8 plus 14. And what do we get for that? Well, it's a, did I do that right? Oh, did I do that right? Yeah. We did. Okay, so the answer that we get is +6. This is kind of like using, I didn't use the rule on this second part, which I should have. I could think about this as -8 plus a +14, and then use rule number 2 because they have different signs. We end up with the difference between them, which is 6. The 6 gets the sign of the bigger number. So there you go. Okay, we're excited. Now you're starting to be excited about these problems, right? You're like, go ahead and challenge me because I can do it. All right, this one's trickier. I see what they're going to try and do to trick us. They stuck in some absolute values here. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Let's just add the mental parentheses in first. We are going to stick with our steps because our steps have not failed us. So let's rewrite it. -4. Plus, what are we going to do here? Just stick some parentheses around it for now. Okay, these are absolute values. I'm just going to make them like a little bit more bold so I don't think that they're a 1 or something weird like that. Okay, so +3 plus -7 plus -2. Okay, now let's simplify. Let's add all the negatives together. I like adding the negatives. Let's get rid of those negatives first. So we've got a -4. This is negative, but there's absolute values around it, so it actually is going to turn that into a positive. I could just get rid of that now and make it a positive because the absolute value makes it a positive. So I'm going to think of that as a positive. Let's stick with the negatives first. So -4, and I've got a -7. So I'm already up to -11 and a -2. So it's -13 so far. Because the sign is what we started with. Now, what are we going to add to that? All the positives that are left. So +2, +3, we're at +5 now. And that's it. That's all we have. So we've got a plus +5. Now we're adding two numbers together that have different signs. That's rule number 2. I'm going to take the difference. 13 minus 5 is 8. Is that right? Yeah. It's 8. And what sign does it get? The sign of the bigger number, excuse me. So it's -8. Bam. Did we get it right? Yes, we got it right, even though we did it a little differently from the book. So if you want to see how they did it, maybe that answer makes a little bit more sense, or that process makes a little bit more sense to you. So go ahead and look it over. All right, definition of subtraction. We've basically been doing it. Subtraction is usually this. 7 minus 4 is 3. But when we change it to sort of an algebraic way of thinking about it, we are going to change that to 7 plus -4. See, we're adding two numbers together. We turned subtraction into a positive. And when we do that and use rule number 2, we get the same answer, +3. Bam! Michael Scott is impressed. Are you impressed? No more subtraction. Come on, that's awesome. And here's the rule about subtraction. So if you want to say it in terms of words instead of in terms of numbers, so they define it for us like this. If A and B are real numbers, then A minus B is the same as A plus a -B. That's the same thing we just did with 7 minus 4, Pretend this is 7 minus 4, but we changed it to 7 plus a negative 4. So if you change those into letters, that means any number. It doesn't have to be a 7 and a 4. It can be a 35 and an 8, right? Any of those numbers, if you want to subtract them, you can just add the opposite of b. Negative b is the opposite of b. So we're going to be, instead of subtracting b, we're going to be adding the opposite of b. Woo! Crazy! Do you get it? I'm going to blow your mind here. There is no subtraction. That's deep. That reminds me of Kung Fu Panda. I should have put a Kung Fu Panda gif. Okay, we're going to practice a few of these. This is the part where you should be practicing, actually. The lesson is over. You know what? I'm going to do practice A for you, and then you'll definitely get that one right, and then you can just do the rest of your homework, okay? So step 1, when you see a problem like this, is to celebrate. Yay, yay, I got this, I can do this, no problem. Step 2 is to make mental parentheses. All right, so we've got a negative 5, we've got a negative 2 that we're going to add, we have a positive 7 that we're going to add, and we have a negative 6 that we're going to add. All right, step 3, I like to do it positives and negatives or negatives and then positives. So let's add all the negatives first. Let's get rid of that negativity. So we've got a 5 and a 2 and a 6. All of these are negative. So add their absolute values. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 6 is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13. So we've got a negative 13 so far. Now we have to we already dealt with these because they're all negative. Now we have to bring down what we haven't dealt with yet, which is plus a positive 7. So negative 13 plus a positive 7. So we take, these have different signs, right? So this is rule number 2, different signs. When we add them together, we take their difference. So what's 13 minus 7? 13 minus 7 is 6. It's the difference between 7 and 13. I don't want to get rid of subtraction, totally. The difference between 7 and 13 is 6. What sign does it get? It gets the sign of the bigger number. So bam, that's your answer to that complicated problem. I've got A done for you. You can do the rest of them, and then guess what? Good night. We are done. Did you know this is good night in sign language? Good, and then night, like a setting sun going over the horizon. That's her hand going over the horizon of her other arm. Cool, huh? All right, Addie, hope you enjoyed this lesson. Have a great day. Bye.